Welcome to our presentation about how to develop a questionnaire. This documentary is made up by students for students. By introducing this documentary, we hope to give the students a better idea on how questionnaires work. Before we start talking about how to develop a questionnaire, it is important to know why questionnaires and surveys are needed in the first place. For that reason, let us start with a little bit of the history of questionnaires. The questionnaire was designed by Sir Francis Galton. This intelligent man, who by the way also is a cousin of Charles Darwin, published over 340 documents and books. He also created the statistical concept of correlation and widely promoted regression towards the mean. He was the first to put statistical methods to the study of human differences and inheritance of intelligence. The surveys and questionnaires he invented were for the purpose of collecting data on human communities. He needed this information for his genealogical and biographical works and his anthropometric studies. His inquiries into the mind involved detailed recording of people's subjective accounts of whether and how their minds dealt with phenomena such as mental imagery. In order to better elicit this information, he pioneered the use of a questionnaire. In one study, he asked his fellow members of the Royal Society of London to describe mental images that they experienced. In another, he collected in-depth surveys from eminent scientists for a work examining the effects of nature and nurture on the propensity towards scientific thinking. Now, what is a questionnaire? A questionnaire is a research instrument consisting of a series of standardized questions and other prompts for the purpose of gathering information from a specific target group. Although questionnaires are often designed for statistical analysis of the responses, this is not always the case. The purpose of a questionnaire is usually to make comments about the group who filled it in, the respondents. It is either that, or to generalize from the wider group to a population of importance for your research. There are two types of questionnaires. First is the descriptive questionnaire, designed to discover the extent of a particular topic or issue within a population. These types of questionnaires typically asks how many people act in a certain behavior. It is important for samples in descriptive questionnaires to be representative of your research population. The second type of questionnaire is the analytical questionnaire. The analytical questionnaire is set up so that you can explore and explain certain associations and relationships between particular concepts. This style is often used in theory building and theory testing research. Therefore, statistically stable sample sizes are more important than representative ones. Obviously, some researchers seek to be both descriptive and analytical, and therefore you will need to have both of a representative sample and a stable sample size appropriate for the processes you are using. Now let's proceed to our 10-step guide of how to develop a questionnaire. Step 1. Keep it simple and make it interesting. Short, clearly phrased questions will get you reliable answers, but it also makes it interesting. This is an example of a survey on students of a university who are almost graduated. Do you wish to have a full-time job after your graduation? Now you will not have many options to answering questions like this, so the answer will be yes or no. This type of question is called a dichotomous question. Step 2. Keep questionnaires short and to the point. The more time you ask from a respondent, the less interest he will have. Also, keep the questions themselves as short as possible. Respondents should not have to read the question twice to understand what it says. A good example of this would be, what's your gender? And then you have the option male or female. Step 3. Try to use language and words the respondents would understand and naturally use themselves. Do not use any complex terms, not in the instructions, questions, nor in the response options. Pre-testing a questionnaire with a small group instead of the audience it is intended for would be a good idea. Here follows a question about the spending in a household. How much does your household spend on clothes in euros per month? 0 to 10 euro, 11 to 20 euro, 21 to 30 euro, 31 to 40 euro, or 41 euro or more. Make sure that you use the right currency and use a clear time frame. Also notice that in the example given, each option is different from the preceding one and different amounts are used. This means that we go from 10 to 11, 20 to 21, and so on. This is essential. Step 4. Think carefully about the order of the questions. Research has shown that the way we answer one set of questions is closely related to the preceding questions. So if you tend to ask something about facilities, and that is immediately followed by overall recommendation questions, you will see that the answers are correlated to issues concerning those facilities. For that reason, it will be a good idea to ask general questions before you move on to specifics. Step 5. Avoid using terms in questions or the response options that are open to a wide interpretation. Research has proven that terms like frequently or often are widely different interpreted by different respondents. It is much better to use terms that have a precise measure. The interpretation of terms like these are much more precise. An example of an erroneous question would be, do you think you will still go out when you are older? The error in this question is the word older. For example, for teenagers, 30 is already old, but for a 50-year-old, this would be considered as a young age. A better question would be, do you think you will still go out for drinks between the age of 40 and 50? This is much more specific. Step 6. Do not worry about including a middle response option if it reflects what some respondents would want to say. There are some people saying not to use odd-numbered scales because respondents will automatically drag to the middle option. In reality, this is not true. It is more likely that not providing the middle option distorts the results that you will receive if that is what the respondents actually want to tell you. Step 7. Avoid double negatives. A double negative is combining a negative form of a verb with a negative pronoun, or a negative adverb with a negative conjunction. An example for the first is this. Would you say your manager is not inattentive? Now, you can already hear this is confusing because what you actually ask is if your manager is attentive. An example for the second combination, negative adverb with a negative conjunction. Have you never handed in an assignment nor document on time? Now, this is just so confusing that it is self-explanatory why you should not use it. Not to mention that the question already is confusing, but have you ever considered how to answer it? Now, this is very difficult, especially with statements. Which brings us to the following. Answering options. A good way of giving your respondents an option is by use of the Likert scale. It is a principle of measuring attitudes by asking people to respond to a series of statements about a topic in terms of the extent in which they agree with them. And so, tapping into the cognitive and affective components of attitudes, meaning that it involves feelings and emotions about certain issues and their knowledge about certain issues. I'm nearly 100% sure that all of you ever have encountered a questionnaire where the Likert scale was used. If you ever had to fill in a questionnaire about your teacher, you probably got this question. Your teacher speaks loud and clear. If you apply the Likert scale, your option would be for answering this question, I strongly agree, I agree, I tend to agree, I tend to disagree, I disagree, or I strongly disagree. Now that is a good example of how the Likert scale works. Talking about scales, let's proceed to the next step. Step 8. Make scales logical. If you want to attach scales or labels to the response options, you need to make sure that they make sense. For example, if you give a numbered rating, you have to rate it from low to high. This means starting at 0 and ending at 10. This is what respondents will expect to see. Research also shows that people answer best when these options are clearly labeled. So for example, good or very good, or something in that direction, which is also, by the way, another example of the Likert scale. However, there is also contrasting research that shows that we get the most accurate answers with quite a wide range of answers. In practice, it is impossible to provide clear labels for all the points on a 10-point scale. It either gets very convoluted or you end up with a very subjective terminology and go back to problems discussed earlier. Step 9. Do not forget 0. I just mentioned the usefulness of a scale rating out of 10. If you tend to use a scale like this one, do not forget to use 0. The reason for this is that people think that if you have a scale rating from 1 to 10, the midpoint is 5, while it actually is not, it is 5.5. You just will make it an artificial cluster around 5. Now here follows an example question of how to do it. How many times per week do you eat ice cream in the summer? 0, because not everyone eats ice cream. 1 to 3 times, 4 to 6 times, 7 to 9 times, or 10 times or more. Which brings us to the final step of the guide. Put personal questions at the end. It is very tempting to design a questionnaire with easy questions in the beginning that everybody can answer. But you have to put personal questions at the end, because it can influence respondents' view on the questionnaire if these questions are at the start. For example, if you want to find out if gender plays a role in the perception of certain issues and topics, do not ask what respondents' gender is at the start, because then they think they have to answer the questionnaire from a typical male or female point of view. Also, do not ask sensitive questions at the start, because respondents will proceed in the questionnaire maybe with a little bit of a negative attitude, because they might find it offensive. So if those questions are of importance for your questionnaire, ask them at the end. So then that was it, our 10-step guide on how to develop a questionnaire. We hope that the documentary will provide you with enough information for the basics on how to develop a questionnaire. Remember that it is not at the full extent that you should develop your questionnaire, because there are always room for more questions. We strongly recommend you to have a look at the book that is on the screen. The book will provide you with all the detailed information. Good luck!